Hi, my name is Jordan. I am a special education teacher from the UK. I share my passion for everything communication, sensory regulation, and fun lesson ideas for my classroom of disabled pupils aged 4 to 11. Each week, I am joined by experts in the field, answering your questions and sharing our knowledge and experience working alongside our beautiful young people. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sensory Classroom podcast. My name is Jordan, and today I'm joined by speech and language therapist Kate Mills, who's katemills.slt on Instagram. Kate is a speech and language therapist based in Southwest London and works with children up to the age of 11, so the same as me. And I'm so excited to talk to her about Gestalt language processing today, especially in the early years. I get so many questions about what it looks like for non-speaking children, as well as all the stages of Gestalt language processing. Maybe we could go through those today. Autism and early years development in general. Hello, Kate.
Hello.
I'm so pleased to have you today. Thank you so much for accepting my invite.
Thank you for inviting me.
I am so keen to talk about early years today. I get inundated with questions whenever I talk about Gestalt language processing. Let's start with the big question that I always get. Can non-speaking children be showing signs of Gestalt language processing through how they play and how they imitate through their body? Can we talk there?
Yes, we can. That's a really good place to start, I think. So yes, we can definitely tell that a child is a Gestalt language processor, even if they're non-speaking. Language processing is all about how we take in language, right? So it's not about what we express. So if they're non-speaking, they don't have to be saying anything in order to show us that they can. That they process language in a particular way, but we just need to look out for the signs. And there are lots of different signs that we can look out for. But if we're talking about those specific signs that are to do with the way that they're using their body, there's something that's called echopraxia, where the child they copy movements and actions from particular shows or particular things that they really enjoy, and they act things out with their body. And I find that so fascinating because as soon as you notice it, it can be quite hard to recognize. But as soon as you notice it, that's when you realize, like, yes, that is exactly how they're processing language. And if we can understand how they're taking language in, then we can help them figure out how to express in the best way that's suitable to them. So that's one of the kind of signs that we can look out for non-speaking children. But there are many, many other signs. And quite often, a really key one for my non-speaking children is that I often see them rewinding at certain parts of videos to rewatch certain parts that they really enjoy. And then they might act it out. They might imitate a sound that they've heard on it. They might just imitate the intonation that they're using. There are so many different things that they can do to show us how they process language. And I find it so fascinating. It's
Absolutely.
so
Through
interesting.
growing up, I mean, I've only heard of Gestalt language processing in the last couple of years. But through my career, I've definitely seen signs of that. I've definitely seen signs of, rewinding VHS tapes. I mean, that's how old we're talking about here, of rewinding and rewatching, and going over those, phrases or just really enjoying that repetition. How do we know if it's not a special interest autism that just gives them a dopamine hit and it's Gestalt language processing, or is it kind of all one and the same?
I would say it's probably all the same because maybe a child that is just showing characteristics of autism, they might kind of do something over and over again because they really enjoy that, as you said, that dopamine hit. But with a child that's rewinding a video, they would rewind it to such a specific part that they would rewatch that specific part. And when you tune into that and when you figure out what is it that they're actually watching, then that's when you can figure out, okay, is this just like an autistic characteristic, or is it the fact that they really enjoy that specific part for that reason, whether it's the music, the sounds, maybe the actions, maybe the things that are on the screen. Maybe it's the particular character that comes on the screen or something like that that will tell you that that is a Gestalt language processor. So they kind of overlap, but I would say usually when they're rewinding to that specific part, that is a really kind of key characteristic that that child is a Gestalt language processor. And they can do that obviously if they're speaking or non-speaking, but we tend to see it with those non-speaking children, and that's kind of a key sign that we notice when and they are non-speaking, because we don't have any words to go off. So we go off what their actions are and what they're actually doing with media that they're watching.
So if we're seeing that in a non-speaking child that we work with or live with, what can we be doing to encourage that communication, encourage that interest in language to help their development in communication and reception?
So what I would say is that the key thing is that you want to watch that video back with them to see exactly what it is that they're looking at. And you might need to watch it a few times. Quite often when children are watching something, usually they're watching it on phones, I find, because then they can rewind it a bit easier. So if they're watching on a phone, I quite often say to parents, just screenshot it so you can see what the minute is, what video it was, so you're not interrupting that play. And then later on, watch that video back and see what is it that they're really enjoying. And this is what we call detective work, right? So we're being a detective, we're figuring out what is it that's really interesting about this part of the video that means something to this child. And from there, once you've figured out, you may not be able to figure out exactly what it is, but maybe you can, maybe there's a song, maybe there's a sound, maybe there's a character, and then you can figure out, you can try and use those different things kind of throughout the day. Quite often it is a phrase or a song that the child will enjoy, not all the time, but if it is, use that phrase. Make a note of that phrase, make a note of how they say it, maybe record it on your phone so that you remember, and then use it with them. Either play it back to them or say it yourself in the same way that the character is saying it. And use it at different points throughout the day. That is always a really key one, because that phrase obviously means something to that child. So we want to show them there are lots of different ways that you can use this phrase, even if it's not exactly in context, because it is in context for the child. It just might not be for, if you don't understand that phrase or that situation that they've picked it up from, you might not necessarily understand that that means something to them. But it does. So we're going to use it in lots of different contexts, even if it's not a perfect fit for that context.
Absolutely. I'll give some examples actually. I've
Mm.
got some beautiful Gestalt language processors in my classroom, and I find it so fascinating what phrases they're picking and how they're using them in context. So for example, I've got one student who, when he needs something from us, he takes a statement from number blocks, and it's, I need a friend to give me a push. And it's because in that context in the show, he's on the swing on his own and he needs a friend to come over and help him push the
Mm.
swing. But he'll use this when he wants a drink, when he wants to go to the toilet, when he wants like help with anything. It's, I need a friend to give me a push. And it's great because now we know that it gives that context to his meaning behind that, and then we can help him and we can honor that attempt of communication, I suppose. I've also had some others as well that they will say a phrase when they know I want an answer from them, but they don't really know what answer I want or need. So it might be good morning, and I'm waiting for a good morning, a hello, or an anything. And then they'll say something seemingly completely random. And in my view, it's just because they know I want them to say something and they don't really know what it was that I want them to say. And this phrase sounds good in my mouth and feels good for me. Is that you're wanting? Is that kind of Gestalt language processing as well?
So quite often that happens with Gestalt language processors because they're taking a phrase from their bank of phrases that they've already got, and they're just using it to kind of put in place. So it may be that they just don't have enough phrases. So they're just using whatever phrase they already have and they're using it within that situation. Or maybe they are used to being prompted with an interaction and they think, well, when someone says this is what I have to say. So they're used to that prompting, which is not helpful for a Gestalt language processor because they're, used to developing language naturally and they don't respond well to prompting and, giving them prompts for different things. things. So I would say within that situation, the best thing to do is to give them a phrase for what they are trying to say. So maybe it's that we try and reduce our questions or eliminate our questions, especially if they're an early stage Gestalt language processor. Or maybe we ask a question, but we give an answer for it so that they've got a phrase that they can use. So they're not drawing from this bank of phrases they have, because that's not enough for them to be able to
Yeah.
answer. And that's why we see children struggling to answer questions in those early stages, is because they either just don't have enough phrases in their bank, or they're just not ready to use flexible language. So they're not able to answer a question. And that's different from receptive language. They might be able to understand what you're asking them, but they might not have the expression in order to answer that question fully.
So maybe offering sound button or a gesture or something to just completely reduce that demand for communication in that context.
Yeah,
And whilst also offering a phrase that they can use if they want to.
exactly. So we want to offer a phrase in whatever form that might be. So it might be spoken, it might be through the use of AAC, it might be low tech, so it might be paper based, it might be using a sound button. I often find that sound buttons or high tech AAC is really good for Gestalt language processors, because they love that auditory aspect of it. So they love listening to it.
Yeah, and it's the same every time. Whereas obviously paper-based, if we're
Exactly.
talking about it, our inflection might change, our pace might change, and then it's not the
It's not the
same for
same.
them.
And for them, it's that whole chunk that they're taking in, right? So it's not just the phrase, it's the melody that goes with the phrase as well. And that's why it's so important that we keep it the same. Sound buttons are so helpful because we can record it with intonation. You can obviously do that on high tech AAC as well, but on a sound button, it's just there. It's really quick. It's really easy to press. And yeah, it offers a different way of communicating it. We're accepting any form of communication within that interaction, but we're offering an alternative way to engage in that interaction. And that is so beneficial for the child, because then they've got a way to communicate with you.
Absolutely, and I love recording them doing it too, because then they can listen back to their own voice. It then helps them to hear their phrase and their voice in a completely different way than how they usually are, and they just seem really interested in this, and it's really is investing in their phrase and give it well, honoring its meaning to them.
Definitely. One of the toys that I actually use a lot within my therapy sessions is one of those talking parrots where you talk to it and then it talks back. And it's the best thing, because sometimes children that I haven't heard using phrases, but I've heard them using those long, unintelligible strings of language, sometimes I'll give them that toy and then they'll start talking to it. And it's like, because they're hearing themselves back, they're echoing, or the parrot is echoing them. So they're hearing themselves back, and then they're going, that wasn't very clear. Let me say it again. Let me try again. Let me make it clearer. And then they use more language. They're trying to communicate so much more. And it's just amazing to see. And that's the same thing that the sound button does, but obviously it's a bit more, you have to press it and do
Yeah.
whatever you need to do to record it. So it's a bit harder for the child to do. But a toy like that, especially in early years, is so engaging and so interesting for them.
Yeah, I mean, God, what how motivating, and it also puts it in, like, a higher pitch as well, so it makes it even more inviting to listen to. Yeah,
Exactly.
we've definitely had some lots of to and fros with, yeah, like you say, talking parrots, singing cactuses. There's all sorts of wonderful repetitive toys up there, isn't there now? And
Yeah,
we're so lucky to live in this kind of generation, I suppose, of there's such great electronic toys out there, which suits Gestalt language processors so much. When I was growing up, Gestalt language processors would have to have a VHS and literally rewind and fast forward, and, like, it was fine, but I can imagine now with high-tech AAC, it's all on tablets with BBC iPlayer on their tablets. I've got some students that literally talk through BBC iPlayer. They'll find a different program, a different section, and they'll be talking through that. Yeah, sound buttons, all these toys. I'm so fortunate and I'm so excited for what is going to be in the next 20 years, what that's going to look like. Now we're understanding Gestalt language processing and speech and language in general just so much more.
exactly.
We've spoken a little bit about how high tech and low tech can support Gestalt language processing. Is there anything we can do to make low tech? Some schools and parents are waiting the long, lengthy process of having a high tech AAC device or funding for sound buttons and electronic toys. Meanwhile, obviously, we want something. Are visuals and low tech AAC worth trying with Gestalt language processing? What are some ways that we can utilize those to really support learning whilst we're waiting for these more expensive resources?
Definitely, it's definitely worth trying low tech. Just because I've said that children that are Gestalt language processors, they like that auditory feedback. They like to listen to it in the same way every time. They like that intonation and melody. Doesn't mean to say that you can't use low tech. Low tech can be just as good. Paper based is absolutely fine, but we just have to remember to be the model that does that intonation for them. Some Gestalt language processors can be cognitive Gestalt language process as well. And they like to read the words on the AAC, whatever that might be, whether it's low tech, mid tech, high tech. So having a paper base can actually be really helpful for those children that really like reading because they can actually read the phrase that you've written on the board. um, so
Interesting.
I have quite a few children who I do use low tech with because they prefer it over the high tech because they can read it in the way that they intended for it to be, and it really
Yeah.
solidifies their language, even more so than just having spoken language. Or sometimes they don't enjoy high tech as much. It's I would say it's not to do with how you process language as to which AAC you're choosing. It's more about the individual child and what works for them. So the best way to look at it is, can we what their strengths are? Can we look at what they enjoy? And then figure out from there, try out a few different types of AAC and then go from there. But definitely start with low tech, start with a board with lots of different phrases on it for lots of different communication functions, and model it with intonation when you're modeling it. So maybe the child points to the phrase that they want to communicate, or maybe they're just exploring and they point to a phrase. Then you can model that phrase back to them, but with that melodic intonation in your voice. So there's definitely ways around it. There are definitely ways that we can use low tech, and there are children that prefer low tech. It's not a case of one's better than the other.
So interesting. I know we should talk about the stages actually,
Mm.
because it obviously starts with whole phrase and it gives it meaning, but then it develops, you hope. But it seems that they go through these stages. So we've spoken a little bit about what it looks like when they're non-speaking. We've spoken a little bit about what it looks like when they've got these whole phrases that they've learned that mean something to them. What is the next step? What are we looking for to know that learners are kind of moving on to the next stage, stage 2?
Yeah, so with the different stages, so we've got 6 different stages that our Gestalt language processors go through. It's called natural language acquisition framework. And in stage 1 is where we're talking about that whole chunk that we've just spoken about. So that whole phrase that they've learned. And then when we get into stage 2, that's when they start mitigating or breaking apart or mixing and matching phrases. So it might be like, time to go outside and let's go to the toilet. And then they swap them round and they say, time to go to the toilet. Did I get that the right way around? You'd swap it round.
Yeah.
So they would take part of one phrase, part of another phrase, and swap it so that they're
To give it a
mixing and
different
matching.
meaning or to make it more meaningful? Is that kind of what they're playing with there?
Yeah, they're just playing with language and taking part of one phrase and taking part of another phrase and mixing and matching it.
So they're realizing that these phrases can be broken up and still have meaning rather than
Exactly.
it can only be whole. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So they're sort of playing around with it to see what else they can do with language. It's, if you think about an analytic language processor, so a child that learns language through single words and then two-word phrases and then onwards to full phrases, they would be playing around with different words and seeing how they fit together when they get to that two-word stage. So they'd have the word biscuit and then they'd say more biscuit, mummy biscuit, they'd be putting those two words together. It's the exact same for a Gestalt language processor in stage 2. It just looks a bit different in terms of they break their phrase apart and they stick it together with other phrases to see what they can do with it. Then we get to stage 3 where they start using those single words and two-word phrases a bit more. And then
Which I think is really interesting because so often looks like they're going backwards because they've had these whole phrases that are beautifully grammatically correct, that are said in the correct order. And then all of a sudden, they're saying non words like flied, they flied away, or they, like, all the words are kind of a bit jumbled up, and then it sounds not grammatically correct. And lots of people that aren't understanding the stages of Gestalt language processing might think, they're going backward. Not they used to say that beautifully, and now they're not. Now they're saying it a bit jumbled, or they're saying it in past tense when it should be present or whatever. But really, that's really exciting, isn't it? That's the exciting stuff because
Yeah.
they're then generating those words on their own. They haven't heard that anywhere else. I heard one the other day, and that's when I knew that my student had got to this next stage. We were watching the Gruffalo, and it's where the Gruffalo spins the mouse around, and he said, Gruffalo spanned mouse around. And I said, he's never heard spanned before. Isn't a word. That means you've made that up. It's come from somewhere else. He hasn't heard that phrase before. That's so exciting. And I was almost dancing. I was like, oh my goodness. Because before it was all learnt phrases. So, but from an untrained ear, that would be seen as a backward step because before he would always say it perfectly and grammatically correct because he was saying the learnt phrase that it says in the
Yeah.
program.
I think it's so important to understand the stages because if you don't understand the stages, you don't understand where you're going with therapy because it does seem really backwards, but it's not actually backwards. It's just that the Gestalt language processor has two more stages to get to before they meet the analytic language processors at the point where they start. So they've got these phrases, these stages, sorry, of whole phrases and then breaking apart and mixing and matching phrases. And then they get to the single words, which is where the analytic language processes start. So it's so important if you think a child you're working with or your child is a Gestalt language processor, it is so important to do your research and figure out what these different stages are so you can understand it better. And the reason why they don't get to that grammar until later is because their grammar is going to be good when they're copying chunks because they are echoing what they've heard. And more often than not, we are going to use good grammar when we're modeling phrases, or especially when they're reading it in books or listening to it on audio tapes or watching TV shows. More often than not, it is going to be good grammar. Sometimes you do get children that use bad grammar, but it's in those early stages. But if you do that detective work that I spoke about and figure out where did they get that phrase from, then you will understand that, okay, that phrase was fully echoed from the show or from the
Yeah,
person.
because some shows like Peppa Pig, for example, or Bing, because they're childlike characters, the childlike characters often says things like in a childlike way, which I almost hate for Gestalt language process because it's teaching the wrong phrase. But Gestalt language processes love those kind of really emotive. But Bing has fantastic intonation. I feel like
Yeah,
lots of my Gestalt language processors love Bing and relate to him in lots of ways, but often doesn't say things grammatically correct. So that's when you might get those kind of phrases.
exactly. Yeah. And sometimes I think another thing to touch upon is that's really important to know is that if you speak more than one language at home, it's so important to do your GLP therapy in your home language, in your strongest language, because you potentially will be modeling bad grammar in English if you're not strong enough in English. And that could cause some difficulties or it might make it harder for us to understand where that child is at. But it's so important that that child hears their home language for one and has that cultural identity, but then also gets a really good, accurate model of language in whatever language
So
you're speaking to them.
in that context, at home, they would maybe be getting their home language, and then at school, they might be getting their, whatever country they're living in's language.
Mhm.
And then is that okay to be like a dual language? Is it harder? Is it the same
So
in that?
there's so much research on bilingualism now, which I'm so happy about. It's always a positive for a child to speak more than one language because essentially you're giving them more words and more ways of saying things. So regardless of the child's ability, their age, their stage, whatever, it doesn't matter. Speaking more than one language is really good for cognition, language, and learning development. So I always say, please speak in your home language if you want to. It can be really natural for people to speak in more than one language, even within the same environment. So maybe at home they speak English and whatever their home language is. And that's also okay because that's what you naturally do. I would just say, regardless of whether your child is a Gestalt language processor or an analytic language processor, whether they're autistic, whether they have a language disorder, doesn't matter. Speak in your most comfortable language, whether that's mixing between them, whether that's just speaking in your home language at home and then the child's just getting there, if it's English or whatever at school. That's okay. They will pick up on language. It will give them more opportunities to hear different words and different phrases.
And I suppose if the parents have different home languages, then they would speak their home languages and the children also would get the benefit of that too.
Exactly. Makes it harder for people that then don't speak the language, but that's the same with every child, right? You would
Right.
you would just learn a phrase. Usually that's what we do when we work with children is that we learn the phrase that they like. We might not use it ourselves, but then at least we're listening out for it so we understand what it means when they are communicating it. But it's such an important thing to kind of mention because so many people will say, well, oh, I can't now use my home language because it's going to make such a difference and it's going to delay their language. It doesn't cause any delays. Speak it. We need to make sure we're keeping that cultural identity for that child. And it is actually really beneficial. So just use it.
It's really helpful, and I that's something I really didn't know, especially about like Gestalt language processes and any, kind of cognitive disability that it wouldn't hinder, which is great. I hear it about visuals as well, if I use visuals or AAC, maybe they'll never speak, and it's the same, isn't it? It's just offering I guess for the same reason, it's offering just more language, just more opportunity, more words, so it's all good.
Exactly, exactly. And I think with everything, we question things too much, which is great that we're kind of questioning what we're doing and how we're supporting. But sometimes I think we overthink it, and it's just a case of use as much language, as much visuals, as many visuals as much as you can in order to support that language development. It doesn't really matter what it looks like. Everything we do is going to be supporting them. So whether that's speaking another language, whether it's using gestures instead of Makaton signs because you don't know them, then that's still beneficial. Obviously, the ideal is to use as many different types of communication as we possibly can to support the child to develop that language and those communication skills. So yeah, it's really, really important that you use as much as you can.
That's really helpful. You said that the Gestalt language process stages kind of then catches up with analytical stages. In your experience, do they always eventually get there or not? I suppose that's something that a lot of parents would want to know. Like, will my child, if they're showing those early signs of whole phrase learning, will they always catch up, or sometimes do they say at a certain stage and then
Yeah, they might just stay at a certain stage. It's one of those things that's impossible to predict. It's like when parents ask, is a non-speaking child going to speak? I don't know. I can't predict how the child is going to react. All I can do is use these strategies with this child and use AAC so that we're giving them a different mode of communication and then seeing from there, do they develop language? Do they move through the stages? Another thing with Gestalt language processes is often they're in more than one stage at one time. So it's not just that they'll just be in stage one, they could be in stage one and two. They could be in, I've seen a child that's been in all of the different stages all at once. But so they could be in multiple stages in one go. But if they're just in stage one and they're in those early stages and we use AAC and we're not seeing any kind of change, we might be thinking, are we using the right approach? Is there anything we can do to change it? And we'll be kind of problem solving to see what can we do to give this child the best opportunity to develop their language. But it is impossible to predict if they're going to move through the stages or not.
yeah, that makes so much sense. And I get lots of messages as well from early years teachers who are now SEN teachers. I mean, all teachers are SEN teachers now. So often they end up in my DM saying, I've got this kid.
Yeah.
What do I do? As a speech and language therapist, what are some things that you would hope to see in an early years setting that can kind of support all children? Because let's face it, at that stage, so many children now are coming into early years with undeveloped or pre-developed speech, or yeah, usually not understanding actually. It's usually like speech. What are some things that early year settings can put in place to support all children to help understand language and communicate better?
Yeah, so that's a big question. But I think the key things that I would think about would be how can I make the environment friendly and communication friendly for everyone? So, one of the things that I would think about is using a visual timetable that lays out the structure of the day. We don't want it to be overly complicated because then that's going to make it really hard for you to keep up with it. And it's going to make it really visually overstimulating for all children. But using a visual timetable can just be for those key events that happen, those key changes can be really helpful. And when you're using the visual timetable, try and use it in the same way every time. So, if we have it up, we're just going to have it up vertically in the classroom every day. Keep it in the same place, keep it in the same structure. We're not going to have it vertically on the board one day and then horizontally on the wall the other day. We're going to keep it the same. And when you're using the visual timetable, just to make sure that you're showing the children what's happening. So you're kind of showing the visual and labeling it and saying it's time for circle time. And then you're sticking it back on to show them that's what's happening now. And then when you finish, you're taking it off to show them it's finished and you're putting it away. So the way I say it is when someone walks into your room, anyone will be able to tell what lesson you're in because they'll be able to look at the visual timetable. And there are so many reasons why visual timetables help, but they can be really good for expression as well, because as well as understanding, usually we think it just supports with understanding, but it's not just understanding that it helps, because yes, you're using a visual to help them understand what's happening throughout the day, but you're also giving the child an opportunity to then communicate something that they want, because they might go up to the visual timetable and point, or they might pull off something and show you. So definitely use a visual timetable really consistently. Try not to overclutter your space, because a really busy environment can be very overstimulating for a lot of children. Lots of people just relate that to supporting autistic children, but I would say it's not just about a busy environment doesn't just distract autistic children, it distracts children with language difficulties, with lots of different neurotypes. It does kind of,
And it can be tidy, but it can also but still be visually cluttered, can't it? So if
yeah,
you've got clear boxes, everything could be tucked away, but it's still quite visually cluttered. So you could have a curtain over it, or you could have opaque
exactly,
boxes. It's things like that, as well as obviously if it is actually cluttered, then that's a problem
exactly.
too. But everything could be away and it could be quite a tidy classroom, but it could be quite bright or quite patterned or yeah, or lots of
Exactly.
really cluttered.
And when we have display boards, we quite often like to make them look really jazzy and interesting, but that can be really distracting sometimes. So I would say keep them really simple if you can. You're still displaying things that you need to display or that you want to display, but it's not becoming overstimulating. I see all these lovely things on Instagram where teachers are making all these amazing boards, and I just think that's great, but we need to make sure that they're not too much, because if they've got things popping out of them and they've got loads of bright colors and loads of patterns and loads of shapes, it can be so overstimulating for any child. So just try and reduce that a little bit and see if that kind
Is
of,
that including visuals? So if you have lots of core boards out and visuals and symbols out and about, can that also be overwhelming and overstimulating? Or is that not an issue because it's, I don't know, helpful? I don't know. How much is too much?
yeah, I would say there's still got to be a balance of that, right? So we don't want to have too many different communication aids out all in one go, because that will be really overwhelming. And the way I think of it is, if it's overwhelming for me, it's definitely overwhelming for a child. So just making sure that you've got the things out that you need and no extras. We're not going to put out loads and loads of different visuals for loads and loads of different things, but we've got the things that we need, and we're putting away the things that we don't need right now, so that we're keeping that space clear. The environment needs to be really consistent, so keeping things, if you've got a visual in a set place, that can stay, but if there are visuals or AAC that you're using for a particular activity, then by all means, bring it out for that activity, but then put it away afterwards, because otherwise it can be a bit too much. So I would say it's all about getting that balance between how much you're actually using and how much you're kind of making sure that you're tidying it away when you don't need it.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And then I suppose we were talking about languages before, but then symbol languages is an interesting one. Been into classrooms that have, I don't know, twinkle visuals for their timetable, but then they have a student using Proloquo AAC, so that's symbol sticks. And then they also have widget symbols that are for their choice boards and around school. Is that the same as using lots of different languages and it's all okay? Or could that be quite confusing for the child because there's lots of different symbols meaning the same thing?
Some children might be able to cope with that, and they might be able to understand all these different symbol languages, as you put. But some children might find that really tricky, because it's a different way of, saying the same thing. It's like giving them, yeah, a different, a whole different system for exactly the same thing. I would say if you can keep it consistent, then keep it consistent. But sometimes we can't because we don't have access to the right resources. Interestingly, we used to think there's like this hierarchy of which kind of visuals are easier to understand and which ones are harder. But we now think that it's actually down to sort of more preference as to what the child enjoys. There is not that one thing's easier than another. Some children like pictures, so we can use pictures to support them. Some children, they able to understand those symbols that we're using. So we'll use the symbols, but usually try and keep it the same if we can for that specific child. And if we're talking about the whole environment, try and keep all of those symbols the same for the whole environment. If there's one child that needs a different kind of visual, like an object to support their understanding or expression, or a picture, then we can use it for that specific child and then keep the whole class really consistent for them.
So the baseline is consistent and then it's
Exactly.
individualized from there.
Exactly. And we know that as long as we're using it consistently, that the child will be able to pick it up usually. So usually you won't have to make any individual adjustments. It will just be the occasional child that you might need to. As long as you're being really consistent, then it should be okay.
I suppose if teachers are listening to this and they're thinking, I definitely need more visuals in my classroom, but we don't want them to spend the whole weekend creating everything all at once. Where's a really good place to start for either an activity or in the classroom? Where is the first step as to introducing visuals into your classroom? Is it the timetable or is there something else?
I would say a timetable is like the easiest one because everyone understands it. So if you can get a timetable up, definitely get it up and make sure you kind of got it all ready. Otherwise, I would say see if you can use symbols or pictures that go with whatever activity you're doing to help the child kind of match up what you're doing physically with the symbol and the writing. So it could be that we're just using a visual, like a board. It could be a board that's a core board of words that are kind of what we mean by core words is those words that we use 80% of the time in our language. So we use, all these words like stop, more, go, um, want,
Finish, want,
finish. Yeah,
talk.
exactly.
Yeah.
All these different words. It could be helpful to try and get a core board out and ready to go. If you do know that you have a Gestalt language processor in the room, then having a phrase board could be really helpful. Just a board of different phrases that the child could use to communicate.
And the parents could help build that, right? Because the parents will know all the phrases that they know. You don't have to start from scratch with this. Get the parents or carers involved in this because they'll be able to write 20, 30, 40 phrases that they know that you can then create. If you're talking early years, you might not know them that deeply yet. Get the parents involved. Give them a copy too. Get them to do it at home.
Definitely. And it's also okay to use something a bit more generic if you're not sure. Because a lot of our children in early years might not be speaking, they might not be showing those obvious phrases that they can use. So it's okay to start with a very generic phrase board that has lots of different communication functions and like phrases that go with those different communication functions, like, I like that, look at that, let's go, open it, whatever it might be. Those, just have a board of these phrases and see what happens. And then at least you've got it for the whole class and you can use it for lots of different activities. So essentially, we've got a core board of individual single words for those analytic language processes, but we've also got a core phrase board that we're using for those Gestalt language processes. And yeah, and then if you can make an individualized one, get parents to help you. Don't do all the work, get them to have a go and give you some phrases because they will know more often than not, they will know all the phrases that the child uses. So I would say those are probably the best place to start, so you're not overwhelming the classroom and not overwhelming yourself getting your classroom ready.
Absolutely. And just to say, if you're listening to this and you want to get started, I've got all of this on my website and it's already done for you, which is why I do that because whilst I'm setting up my classroom, I might as well be setting up yours as well. So on my storage drive, there are lots of core boards and phrase boards and symbols and visuals for your classroom and timetables. There's a core word program. There's all sorts of stuff on there. So if you're wanting to get started but don't really know where to start, head there and at least it will get you give you an idea of how to get started and then you can individualize from there. And you've got a great support system as well, especially for those parents. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I offer speech and language therapy sessions face to face, either at home or in schools or nurseries in Southwest London. But I also have a parent advice hub, which is something that parents can access wherever you are. And it's just an online 30-minute session where you can chat to me about any questions you might have about your child's speech and language development. And yeah, it's just a space where you can ask any questions without judgment. And I can give you some tips and strategies to support your child. Quite often, what we need when we're working with communication is we need individualized approach. So using all this generic stuff that we see online is a great place to start, but we need to individualize it for that child. We need to make it really specific for them. If yeah, accessing something like my parent advice hub could be helpful because then you're getting a little bit of support without having to sign up to therapy. And yeah,
Yeah,
you
or
can
while
just
you're
ask those
waiting, I
questions.
think it's such an incredible offer because so often speech and language therapists have a really long waiting list, especially if you're going through the NHS. And in schools as well, they're really hard work. You know, we've got one speech language therapist in our whole school that tries to spread herself so thinly across, the entire need. So being able to just ask these questions for 30 minutes might really set you up to succeed rather than having to wait and having nothing whilst you're waiting. So I think that is an incredible offer for parents to just be able to just start and start in the right way as well. Because there's lots of bad advice out there online too, and lots of old fashioned advice. And we want to make sure that you're giving your learner and your child the best start possible, don't we?
Exactly. And the advice hub can be helpful for getting those first steps. I would say I've done it with some families where we do a few advice hub sessions every so often just to kind of catch up. But I would say ideally if your child needs therapy, we'd give them some therapy. But if you can't access that, then at least this is something that you can access for the moment.
Absolutely. And you're talking to an expert, which is what we need. And you've got access to an expert, which is so often very difficult. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kate. I'm going to leave in the description below. I'll have the link to the Parent Advice Hub, and I'll also have a link to your Instagram as well, so that people can check that out.
Amazing. Thank you so much.